Welcome to your home of all things South American soccer, an in-depth look into the action across the whole continent, providing you with a tactical, analytical and critical view supported by Pinnacle's unrivaled odds. This is South American Soccer Insights. Well, we're into the final straight in South American World Cup qualification. Who will join Brazil and Argentina on the plane to Qatar? That is the question. So we look back on another dramatic round of qualifiers and ahead to March's final showdown, plus a quick look to the start of this year's Copper Libertadores and any other transfer chat that may pop up. As ever, I am joined by Mr. Tom Robinson.
Hi there, Peter. Good to be back chatting about a pretty exciting round of World Cup qualifiers. Maybe Simon won't agree with me, but it's definitely getting to that business stage, and obviously looking forward to the very early stages of the Libertadores now as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And as you mentioned there, Tom, we also have with us a maybe not too happy Simon Edwards.
Yeah, I was talking before the World Cup qualifiers how I love World Cup qualifiers in South America. It's the best tournament, a 10-team league with lots of competitive nations, the whole of the continent watching. And that's all true. But when you don't score in 7 games, you do kind of lose a bit of the excitement. But we'll get into all of that stuff. It's looking forward to it.
Yeah, we definitely will get into that exact subject. We had another 2 rounds of fixtures in South America. Brazil and Argentina, of course, already have their places guaranteed. And it's below that where things are a lot more interesting. Ecuador are almost there, not guaranteed their spot, but they drew in a bizarre game against Brazil 1-1 in their first game of last week. And then they followed that up with another 1-1 draw against Peru. It's below them where things get very, very interesting. And probably the big winners of the last doubleheader were Uruguay, who are now sitting in that 4th and final automatic spot after back-to-back wins. Peru sit in that playoff spot in 5th. And then we have Chile and Colombia, as we mentioned. As we've talked about it already, we'll come to you with that subject, Simon, because it kind of felt as though we've been talking about especially the 4th and 5th positions in South America now for the last few international breaks. It felt as though in the last one, with just 1 round, of course, or 2 rounds, 1 window still to come, as there was maybe one big winner, which was Uruguay being able to get back-to-back wins and get themselves up into that 4th, and one big loser, really, which was Colombia, who have left themselves really on the outside in need of a bit of a miracle, really, in March, if they're going to make it.
Yeah, it shows how quickly things can change in the space of a week. Colombia were I believe in the automatic spots before. It seems so long ago now. And then to lose that game, particularly a game against Peru. Against Argentina, obviously, recent history, Colombia and Argentina has always been tight. I think Colombia, obviously Colombia got a win recently. The Copa America was very tight. It's been a close game. And although the result may look a little bit close, on the evening, Colombia really didn't produce anything. One Miguel Borja chance was really the only thing Colombia did away in Argentina. And I think the game at home against Peru just completely destroyed all of the hope and all of any remaining optimism in Colombia. Colombia had 30 shots on goal, which is obviously the big stat and is obviously massively relevant. They kept Peru at arm's length for most of the game, but there weren't clear-cut chances. It wasn't like some of the more recent games we've seen where it's kind of come down to poor finishing or bad luck. And there was a bit of both of those things, as you'd imagine if you have 30 shots on goal. But it wasn't like they had these really simple chances. Gallese made a few good saves, but I think the closest Colombia came to scoring was almost an own goal. So it's like Colombia was so in control of that game for large spells. Obviously, huge credit for Peru to go in the other end and getting that winner. It's a massive result there in Barranquilla. There's questions in Colombia as well as to whether Barranquilla is actually helping. One complaint that Colombians have is that a lot of people go to the Caribbean coast to watch Colombia, and it's a lot of rich people from the big cities who enjoy a weekend on the beach and then watch the game as kind of part of a bit of a holiday. And there's complaints that the Peruvian fans were making more noise and getting behind the team more than Colombia were. But it's not an easy place to go. It's hot in Barranquilla at 3 in the afternoon. So huge respect for Peru keeping their tight organisation in defence and hitting Colombia on the break. But honestly, the desperation Colombia were feeling at points in that game. Literally, Wilmar Barrios was the only guy in Colombia's half, and that's a defensive midfielder who's the only guy receiving the ball from the goalkeeper. So they definitely threw everything at it in that particular game, but the frustration was growing and growing and growing. Colombia have scored fewer goals in their last 7 games than San Marino, who have won one game since 1986 or something like that. So, you know, while the 0-0 draws are at times valuable, you got to score a goal, you know. And I still think Colombia should win at home against Bolivia, and they probably should win away against Venezuela, or that would be probably a more tricky game. And that will put pressure on Peru, and that will, you know, make things, put pressure on Chile and Uruguay. And I think Colombia will make this competitive down to the final game, depending how results go elsewhere. But Colombia had everything in their hands and now completely depend on Peru, Chile, and I think Uruguay probably best for Colombia if they win. But it now comes down to Colombia hoping Peru can't win any of their next 2 games, and Chile don't get much more than a point. So it's all gone out of Colombia's hands, and massive frustration. They named, I think, 9 forwards in their squad, and they couldn't get any goals on the board. And the thing as well about Colombia is the substitutes they were bringing on have not featured for 2 years in the Copa America, in the World Cup qualifiers. The likes of Inestrosa or Baloyes, who are fine players, but these are guys in their mid to late 20s who've never done anything for Colombia and are now suddenly the hopes for turning this around. And often what Colombia do is for 65 minutes they get behind the ball, and we saw that against Argentina, kind of just defending for 65 minutes and then just panic and throw on 5 strikers. And it's kind of one extreme to the other, you know. It's get everyone behind the ball and try and keep the game tight and then try and nick something. And then, oh God, this isn't working. Right, let's throw on 4 strikers and have no midfield for the remaining 20 minutes. And neither of those are sensible ways to win a football match. So Colombia are very much lost at this stage. Who knows? They could still make it to Qatar. I think Colombian fans will be a bit embarrassed if they did make it at this stage. Yeah, terrible, terrible week. And Colombia is not a happy place when it comes to international football right now.
Yeah, but before we leave Colombia, what do you think they could do ahead of March? Do you think they're going to stick with the same setup? Because we've seen a lot of other nations in the South American qualifying during the process as recently as the last rounds change managers, for example. We'll get on to one of those big changes in a moment. But with Colombia, we are talking about a team, as you said, who have not scored now in 7 games. That was really evident in that damaging defeat at home against Peru. But there was also a real marked passive nature of how they came in against Argentina, which, yes, we know Argentina have been very much improved. They've looked dangerous. They and Brazil have been head and shoulders really above the rest of the field. But we're talking about an Argentina team that were missing several players, had already got their place guaranteed, and yet we saw Colombia come to Argentina and really offer and not even look to take the game to them, when it was in fact Colombia who were desperate for something from the game. Was that as much of a concern as anything else, and do you think it could lead to a big change in Colombian football before March?
Yeah, it will be interesting to see, because really Rueda came in as like the safe pair of hands, right? You know, we've had they brought in Queiroz, who tried to change things up quite a lot, made big changes for that initial Copa America. Colombia did okay, and then obviously the humiliating defeat against Uruguay and then Ecuador, and then Queiroz was gone, and then it was Rueda coming back to the national team, a guy who people liked, just generally a likable guy who would probably keep things simple, but that should be enough with the individual quality Colombia have to get them over the line. Keep the big stars, keep James, keep Cuadrado happy, give them an important role, and that should be enough. And obviously now, again, there's real bad feeling in the camp. Not in the same way as with Queiroz, because with Queiroz it was like, we're angry, we're doing the manager's made changes and they've taken away what we are. With Rueda, he's really just given the important established players the role that they would like to play. So the players aren't really upset with the manager in the same way. They're just massively frustrated. You know, it's just like, what do we do? Because you look at the 11 they played against Peru, and I would struggle to see more than one or two of the Peruvian players getting in that Colombia 11 in terms of profile, in terms of technical ability. You know, there's not as though Colombia are massively lacking ability. So it's hard to know what to do. The changes didn't help. And even, for example, like Jassa Esperilla, who was really the star, the 18-year-old off to Watford. If we mention some transfers, that's an interesting one to watch. But he had such a good performance in the friendly Colombia had. And it's a friendly, it's a second-string team, but he was the real bright spark. You know, suddenly Colombia was excited. We've got this young guy, Esperilla, he's going to do great. They named him in the full national team squad and then didn't even name him on the bench. And instead you've got like 30-year-old fullbacks coming on and, you know, Tecillo's playing centre-back. So there was definitely chances for the manager to if he's going to just throw a curveball and throw in a random kind of guy from into the squad, bring him in, maybe he's going to spark something. The guys that he used for that role were established 30-year-olds who never played for the national team before. You know, there's things he could have done to kind of build some enthusiasm, and the changes as well really upset a lot of people because Colombia looked okay and then they lost a lot of that control later on. It's difficult to know what to do because who would go to Colombia at this point? Which manager? You know, Colombia, if you ask Colombians, I've seen some polls, they'd love Gallardo, but I don't think there's much chance of him leaving River to come and take over Colombia to not qualify for the World Cup. So then what do? You know, Osorio? Ooh. An interesting candidate, although I'm not particularly impressed with what he's done in the Colombian league in the last few years. There really aren't many good Colombian managers. And it's probably a tricky process to find someone who can come in, unify the group, but also there's a sense in Colombia that you need to shake things up a bit now. You can't keep because James walked off the field screaming at the fans, going, "You ungrateful so-and-sos." And it's just not a good look right now. I think fans are sick of the sense that these big stars have been living off what they did in 2014 for the last 8 years. You know, obviously Colombia went to 2 World Cups having missed out for a decade. So there's reason to respect these guys, but I think the sense now is they want change, but they're still going to have to rely on some of these established guys who aren't going to be that keen on change. So it's a tricky decision, and whether they'll make that in the next month, I doubt. I think just win the next 2 games and hope for the best. Easier said than done with this Colombia side, but it's going to be a shame because I think this Colombia side probably in terms of ability has a higher ceiling than the likes of Peru and probably even Chile. But that doesn't mean anything if you can't perform on the pitch and you can't put the ball in the back of the net for a year or whatever it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's certainly a squad that people look at in something of a surprise from the outside to see where they are in danger of missing out. And Tom, another one of those squads that certainly looked as though they could be in danger of doing the same with a very talented group was Uruguay. And we spoke about them last time out. We spoke about the fact that they'd finally pulled the trigger on Tabarez. Diego Alonso's come in as manager. We did say at the time that maybe they did a bit of a favour to Alonso by holding that decision off until the fixtures became a bit more favourable. But they certainly did what they had to do last week in those 2 games, and Uruguay now look back on track in terms of heading to the World Cup.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost the polar opposite of what's happened with Colombia a couple of weeks ago, months ago. It was looking absolutely terrible for Uruguay, and they've just picked up those 2 must-win games that probably in our hearts of hearts, we probably all would have expected them to win. But, you know, it's one thing being expected to get the result and actually going out and doing it. So real vindication for the choice to bring in Alonso. I think obviously his impact is there for everyone to see. You know, you saw more attacking intent, you saw better pressing, intensity, winning the ball further up the pitch, and real vindication for Suarez and Godin, who combined for that goal against Paraguay to win the game. Obviously not a great game by any stretch of the imagination, not one that will live long in the memory of anyone who watched it. And as per Pinnacle's pre-game odds, it was pretty tight. You know, they couldn't really, there wasn't much to choose between either of these sides. So the fact that it was just a single goal, really nice finish actually from Suarez, who'd also hit the crossbar in the first half as well, to get that win. But I thought it was impressive. It was kind of them grinding out the results like we're used to, and then the real standout performance was that first half against Venezuela. You know, the best I've seen Uruguay play for a real long time, actually. Excellent football in that first half. Obviously helped by the fact that Bentencor had a lovely goal in the first minute, I think. But it wasn't just that. It was the fact that whereas, you know, we were talking there, Simon was mentioning how there was no wild card for Colombia, whereas Uruguay, they brought in Facundo Pelistri in both games, which was, I think, had a lot of people scratching their heads because he's not made an impact at United. He's not even necessarily a regular at Alaves, but he was absolutely fantastic. You know, that beautiful dribble and run to set up De Arrascaeta's goal was vindication again of the choice to pick him. And yeah, I think all in all, Uruguay are now extremely happy that they've got that they've got those wins, and now their future is in their own hands. So I think you look at the next two fixtures against Peru and Chile, and again they're the absolute boxed office clashes for that final round of games. But you think Uruguay, they know what they need to do here. Just don't lose to Peru. Don't lose any ground. Peru, I think, will probably get some points up against Paraguay, but as long as Uruguay don't have an absolute mare, then there's no way that Colombia will catch them. And I think Chile are always going to struggle to pick up points against Brazil. So I've got faith that Uruguay have done enough just as it when it mattered most. But certainly they like to keep you hanging on the edge of your seat really until the last minute.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it was the performance against Venezuela which I think which really caught the eye and seemed to breathe life back into Uruguay. I think supporters seemed to be a lot buoyed by what they saw there at home. You mentioned there the opening goal being so important, Tom. Bentencor scoring early on. As we're just finishing a transfer period as well, we saw Bentencor make that move to Spurs. He's just made his debut off the bench, but what can Spurs expect to see from Rodrigo Bentancur going forward?
Well, I mean, he's such a classy operator. I think I've always described him as a bit of a Rolls Royce of a midfielder. You know, he's tall, he's elegant, he's got a bit of physique about him, and he just always looks like he's got loads of time on the ball. I think sometimes there's been the criticism both at Boca and Juve that in the really big games he can occasionally go a little bit missing. And I do wonder if the intensity of the Premier League will suit his style of play. I think he's someone who's tailor-made for maybe Italian league or Spanish league. But no, he's got everything you want from a midfielder. You know, I think if he settles well and adapts to the Premier League, he's going to look like one of these guys who just makes football look easy, like he's playing in his slippers. So I think he's going to bring a lot to that side, and definitely a really, really big signing. Obviously linked to Aston Villa as well, which is a shame to miss out on him. But I think if anything, he's probably a better fit for the Spurs midfield than what Villa are specifically looking for right now. So that's definitely a really big transfer, one that I'm really intrigued to watch because, well, I'm sure you as well, Peter, were always a big fan of him when he was breaking through at Boca, originally more of a number 10, but has sort of settled into that more deep-lying midfield role. But certainly a big step in his career, and I think only going to benefit the Uruguayan national team as well.
Yeah, and by the looks of things, we'll be heading to the World Cup. Simon, we'll come back to one of the teams that we mentioned while talking about Colombia, because we talked about that's something of a smash and grab result for Peru, but a massive one away to Colombia. Edison Flores having a dream week really for Peru by popping up not only with that late winner, but then again in their second game scoring what proved to be a vital equaliser against Ecuador. Obviously, all 3 points at home in that game would have gone a long way to pushing Peru into qualification. As it is, they've still got work to do. But considering where Peru were at the start of this qualification process, making that very slow start, how much of a success is it that we're talking about with this final round of, or the final week of World Cup qualifying to come in March, that Peru are within their own hands, having a place in the World Cup yet again. And how much credit could we give to Ricardo Gareca for maybe doing it once again?
Yeah, absolutely. Huge amount of credit. And even that draw at home against Ecuador, I think is really creditable, because Ecuador showed this week how strong they can be, how impressive they can be when they get going, when they start, getting those attacks together, when they use all of that speed and that creativity. Anderson Plata, it's a really impressive side, Ecuador. So for Peru, obviously they're at home, but to go 1-0 down early and still come back into that game and get the point, which I think is going to be vital. I think it's hugely important, that game. I was hoping from a Colombian perspective that Ecuador, the old neighbours over there, can do us a favour, and in the end, Peru stuck into the game and then got that goal and looked much stronger. So they kind of really weathered the storm for 60 minutes. They went behind early, and Ecuador were looking very, very strong. I thought it might be a comfortable Ecuador win, but Peru finished the game strongly. And I think when we started this World Cup qualifying campaign, we saw a lot of some countries that were kind of sticking with what they had. In the case of Peru, a team that's a little bit aging, but has brought a few younger guys in as well, but are consistent. And a lot of countries that were looking to kind of redefine themselves and make managerial changes. There were a lot of managerial vacancies in South America at the start of this World Cup qualifying campaign. And I think Peru, in the end, have brought things together. They've got a unified group, which is a strong contrast to where Colombia are right now. And I think that's been really, really important. While I don't think anything about this Peruvian side is particularly revolutionary, there's nothing, really, really exciting about them. But if you're solid, if you get men behind the ball, if you've got a group that knows each other, they know their strengths and their weaknesses, if you get a good organization, if you believe in the manager, then you can get the results necessary. And to get 4 points from these two games against sides which I think notably in Colombia and Ecuador, now while Colombia have been flat, they're both sides that have a lot more pace, a lot more physicality, a lot more creativity perhaps even than Peru. But Peru did the job. So full credit to Peru. I still think it's going to go down to the final game, and I still think there's going to be dramatic twists and turns. Imagine the final game of this World Cup qualifying when there's 3 or 4 teams all potentially could qualify playing at the same time, and there's goals in over here and goals in over there. I think for the likes of Chile and Colombia, if they get to that stage, then there'll still be reason to believe. It will still be interesting, because if Peru go a goal behind, then suddenly it all opens up again. It's going to be fascinating. But as you say, lots and lots of credit to Gareca, lots of credit to Peru, because I didn't fancy them 2 weeks ago, and they've proved me wrong completely in terms of the results they've got this week. And they finished that game against Ecuador looking much stronger than they started it. So again, I think that's a sign of great character and a strong, unified group.
Yeah, Tom mentioned before that their next game is away to Uruguay, which looks difficult. Uruguay could really push themselves through into the World Cup qualification with a victory over Peru there. Crucially, maybe their final game of World Cup qualifying is at home to Paraguay. And Tom, we were talking before about managerial changes. Paraguay rolled the dice, brought in Guillermo Barros Schelotto for this final period. They were playing catch-up already. It's not as if he can really be blamed for their position. But certainly it hasn't had that managerial boost that they would have liked. They had a very poor week again. And you're already looking at that appointment and thinking, I'm not really sure Barros Schelotto is the man to turn the fortunes of Paraguay around.
Yeah, he's a fine manager, but I don't think he's anything better than they had before. So you look at Paraguay, and it was the same old errors as well. Against Uruguay, they were doing really poorly from defending set pieces, which I think has dogged them throughout. I remember the Argentina game earlier in the qualifiers. Argentina had a lot of joy through that route as well, and for a Paraguay side, that's bread and butter. You've got to be doing better than that, really. So I think they've really tailed off, and you kind of wonder where next for Paraguay, because it's not, it's a solid team. There's lots of good, hard-working players, but there's no magic there. Yes, Almiron is someone who can make things happen, but he was really well shackled, I thought, by Ronald Araujo. Quite a good tactical move there by Uruguay to stick a centre back at right back to get rid of that key threat for them in that game. And against Brazil, they were just so toothless. I mean, I know no one really goes to Brazil and wins games, but the manner in which they just capitulated, it's just, yeah, really, really poor. And especially with other teams out there looking like they're improving, and surely a team like Colombia going to be better in next qualifying, it does feel like that Paraguay are quite a long way off the pace, and you just wonder when are they going to get back to a World Cup, because Ecuador are improving, I think Chile are improving, Peru are still showing they've got plenty to give as well, and even Bolivia are doing better than them, and Venezuela, you'd think with Peckerman in charge and on paper a decent squad, they're going to be champing at the bit, and it'd be quite a fall from grace to see Paraguay knocking around those last spots when for a while they were pretty much World Cup regulars. So yeah, really, really disappointing. I think it's gone under the radar what a bad couple of games they've had there, just because obviously the focus has been on teams above them. But yeah, really, if I was a Paraguay fan right now, I'd be not too positive about the future. Sorry, guys.
Yeah, I mean, ditto. The problem for me, looking from the outside as well as them appointing someone like Barros Schelotto, is personally feel as though he's a coach that really benefits when he's got good individual players that can kind of bail him out at times, and very reliant on individual moments rather than him setting up his teams to be particularly organised in a way. And I feel as though that's really what Paraguay need when you look at a more limited set of players than they're up against some of the teams that you mentioned there in South America. But time will tell whether that appointment, I don't think he's going to get given the chop because of their failure to qualify. He certainly wasn't at fault. But before wrapping up, we didn't really talk about Chile, because we're talking about the teams that are still in with a chance. And Chile are right there, having come again rather late. We probably wrote them off earlier in the qualifying process. They lost at home to Argentina, but then picked up that much-needed win away to Bolivia to still leave themselves in that mix. Simon, looking ahead to March, where they obviously go away to Brazil, which they probably won't be expecting much. Then on the final day, host Uruguay, who may themselves still be playing for World Cup qualification. Is that very tricky doubleheader for Chile maybe what makes them real outsiders to guarantee themselves a spot?
Yeah, look, I think the win away against Bolivia will give them a lot of confidence. It will show their resilience. What I've been impressed with Chile is that they have that. They seem to get the most out of the what they have at the moment still. There's still that experienced core to the side. Alexis Sanchez puts on a heroic performance at the altitude of Bolivia. Obviously, the altitude doesn't seem to have such an impact on Chile as some of the other sides, but that's a huge win. To win in Bolivia 3-2, that's a huge result, and I think that will give them confidence to kind of overcome that adversity. Now they're going to be facing a Brazil side who, again, they make changes, Brazil, but they still look strong. We saw them flustered a little bit against Ecuador at times, which may give some hope to some others, but then they had another dominant performance in the following game. So it's going to be interesting. Chile have done very well to get back into it. It shows, I think, the strength of character in that side, plus the ability they have. There's some reasons to be positive. Ben Brereton as well continues to impress, which is great for them. I think that gives them something in attack, a focal point, which they didn't necessarily have. So he's helped out Chile, and I think they've helped him out as well. He seems to be banging them in the championship these days, which is great. But yeah, it's going to be very difficult. Going away to Brazil is going to be a blow. And I think the order of fixtures is interesting as well. I think that will become a factor. That Uruguay-Peru game is going to be really, really interesting to see. The whole of South America, Chile, Colombia, everyone's been watching that. I think for Chile and for Colombia, they'll be hoping Uruguay get the win to put a bit of pressure on Peru. And yeah, I think from a Colombian perspective, we're just hoping and waiting for Brazil to do the job against Chile and leave everything down to the final day. But if Chile gets something away in Brazil, and again, this is a Brazil who's already qualified, they're looking very, very professional. What you'd say about Brazil is they're professional. They're not always as exciting as they could be during these qualifiers, but their defense is very strong and they have a lot of attacking options and a lot of players who will be wanting to secure their place, There's so many good wingers, so many, the likes of Vinicius Junior, not a guaranteed starter, but when he gets his chance, he's obviously motivated. Rafinha's getting his chance. So what you see with Brazil is while they're rotating, there's no complacency with the guys who come in. Everyone knows it's so hard to get in that Brazil 11. And with less than a year to the World Cup, we're talking 10 months now. There's a lot of motivation still for Brazil. So it will be interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that game in Brazil goes, because Chile may throw everything at Brazil and come up a bit short and then find themselves struggling in that really tricky game against Uruguay. Or they may kind of write it off mentally and see it as anything as a bonus against Brazil. And that could even help them. You think, okay, well, if we get a point, we're delighted. If we get a win, brilliant. It'll be interesting to see how these games are approached. And also the schedule as well, how these games, the timing works out. And, when teams can see what's happening elsewhere, maybe Uruguay decide, you know what, a draw against Peru is okay. It will be interesting. As someone who's watched Colombia, I remember Colombia-Peru, obviously that game where Peru had Falcao had a little whisper in the ear of some of the Peruvian players to remind them, job's done, lads. Let's not play anymore for the last 5 minutes. So it will be fascinating. There's going to be a lot of twists and turns. But yeah, credit to Chile to get into this point, and they'll be snapping at the heels of Peru. I don't really rate this Peruvian side. I respect what they've done, but I could see them getting nothing from the next 2 games. Although Paraguay, of course, is not a strong opposition. But if Peru, maybe this is wishful thinking, but if Peru don't get the job, there's Colombia with 2 hopefully easy games and a motivated Chile. Things could definitely still change.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating. We'll finish just because you mentioned there the professionalism and some of those players sort of probably playing for their hopeful spots in a World Cup squad for the likes of Brazil and Argentina. Tom, we saw Argentina win both games despite having already been qualified. We saw Brazil, as you mentioned, players that are maybe not necessarily automatic starters, but impressed in a very dominant win over Paraguay. Not looking ahead to March, because I think we know what we're going to get from Brazil and Argentina, even when they are qualified. But looking at where they are now and looking at some of those squad players coming in and doing well over the last couple of weeks, where do you think those 2 squads are now heading towards a World Cup? Simon just said they're less than a year away from a World Cup, both of them featuring high up in the odds there amongst the favourites in Qatar. Do you think that's about right? Are we seeing 2 teams that look to be gathering momentum?
Yeah, I mean, Brazil are obviously always going to be one of the favourites for the World Cup, and the way that they've just eased their way through qualification without too many slip-ups at all is really impressive. They've got so much depth. They've got, okay, maybe at fullback they're not the most blessed with talent right now, but pretty much everywhere else on the pitch they've got strength and depth. 2 of the best goalkeepers in the world when they're not trying to kick people's heads off. 4 excellent centre backs, I think. You've got 2 of the best defensive midfielders in the world in Casemiro and Fabinho, and then obviously a sprinkling of talent up front. Neymar, Vinicius Junior, probably the best player in Spain right now, and then obviously a lot of other good guys who are coming in and making things difficult for Chicha's selection there. So Brazil are always going to be up there. I think the problem that they have is they've got so few games against real top opposition, especially in Europe. So they've got such a fine margin for victory, basically, because they get through to maybe let's say the quarter final of a World Cup and come up against a European giant. If they win it, brilliant, everything's gone to plan. But if they don't, it's like, oh, we've got to wait another 4 years until we get a shot to show what we can do against the very best. As for Argentina, I genuinely think that, without trying to get on the Scaloneta hype too much, that they do have a shot at this World Cup now. I think before it was a case of, right, let's just be in the conversation and be maybe an outside bet for a World Cup spot. But the way they're playing, and crucially the mood in the camp, is so good. I mean, you saw at the final scenes there after the Colombia win, you've got Emi Martinez with the Copper America trophy in front of all the fans at the Kempes. They're absolutely buzzing. And the fact that I think this round of fixtures was on sort of under the radar, really impressive from Argentina, because no Messi, no Romero, even in the second game as well. Key players like De Paul not there as well. And players like Di Maria, who, you'll know as well as anyone out there in Argentina, Peter, but he was, someone who is not necessarily everyone's favourite, and people were saying, what's he done for the national team, which was probably a bit harsh because he was so crucial in 2014. But he's really rehabilitating his image with the Argentinian people. The way he's taken that captain's armband, brilliant goal against Chile, and I thought he was really good against Colombia as well. Lisandro Martinez coming into the defence and showing that he's ready to step up, and certainly if he's not starting at the World Cup, he's going to be the man going forward to partner Cuti Romero. So I think Argentina are in a great place right now, and they've just got to feed off those good vibes, and they've got a really, really good chance. I mean, there's no reason to rule them out, even though no one's going to put them in the top 3 or 4, but certainly I think they've got a claim to be 5th or 6th favourite for the World Cup, and where they were before and during last World Cup, that is a million miles away from that disaster. So yeah, really, really positive for Argentina, and it's Qatar can't come soon enough, I think, for most Argentinians right now.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, the fortune, the atmosphere around the national team, not just with the players, with the people in Argentina. Di Maria really the focus of that now, the player who most people I think would have been happy not to see him in an Argentina shirt again post 2018 World Cup, and put in some of the best performances he has done for the national team in the absence of Lionel Messi. We're talking there about the fact that Argentina might be considered 5th or 6th favourites. I think according to Pinnacle's World Cup odds, they'd have them as the 6th favourites as things stand going into the World Cup, with Brazil as the outright favourites. Simon, would you, before we leave the subject of World Cup qualification in South America, would you go along with that as Brazil being the favourites in Qatar?
Yeah, I think we're kind of taking, in South America, a little bit Brazil for granted because they started so strongly and they've been so consistent. I think a lot of the feeling in South America is how exciting that Argentina are really quite good again. So I think it's interesting to see that Brazil are still top. That's more of a distant view and a formal assessment of the situation, which I think is fair enough. But for me, I'm really excited about this Argentina scene. So I think perhaps because Brazil are so solid and so organised and so defensively strong, I think that probably does make them stronger candidates to win the World Cup than Argentina because of how important that solid base can be in a tournament. But I think Argentina deserve a lot of credit for the incredible progress they've made. Before 2018, I was kind of hoping Argentina wouldn't make it because they didn't deserve to. They were a shambles. Obviously they got over the line and they were quite competitive. A bit of a shambles, I think, at the World Cup, but quite competitive. And to narrowly lose to France is obviously a respectable result. But the difference since then has been incredible. Obviously, they've sorted out the defence. The goalkeepers come in. The Messi doesn't have to do everything anymore. He can have his moments and not have to drop and build the play from deep. So I think it's fair to have Brazil as favourites. Overall favourites is strong because I don't think they're a perfect side. And we saw against Ecuador that when things go against them, they can be got at. So I think it's perhaps a little bit generous to put them outright favourites, but they're definitely amongst the favourites. And I think Argentina, as Tom said, are now contenders. I actually think I had a bet on the 2018 group stage that they wouldn't win any games. And I almost won, I think. Or they wouldn't qualify. I had some money on Argentina doing badly in the group stage. And I was very close to winning that bet. So in this upcoming World Cup, I won't be betting against Argentina. I'll be looking forward and enjoying what they can produce, which is a nice change.
Yeah, it absolutely is. And it has been a remarkable turnaround. So it's definitely a date for your diaries in March, the final 2 fixtures in South America. 24th of March, we'll see Uruguay against Peru, as we mentioned, Colombia host Bolivia, Brazil against Chile, Paraguay, Ecuador, and then Argentina hosting Venezuela. And then the dramatic final day on the 29th of March, Peru against Paraguay, Venezuela, Colombia, Bolivia against Brazil, Chile against Uruguay, and Argentina head to Ecuador for the final round. Remember, 4 automatic spots, the 5th spot going into that playoff. So really just a fascinating end to South American qualification you should not miss. And of course, you can check out all those odds on pinnacle.com. Also, this week, we have the return of the Copper Libertadores. It's the first round of the Copper Libertadores, so the first round of qualifying, long before even the group stage begins. But it has to be said, Tom, we've got 3 fixtures this week. And considering it's the first stage of the Copper Libertadores, it's 3 quite intriguing fixtures on paper.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. I think the one that really jumps out to me is the Montevideo City Torque against Barcelona, which will be on Tuesday night. Pinnacle have it pretty even in terms of the odds for that game, with Torque 2.520 for a win, Barcelona 2.850 for a win, and 3.110 for a draw. So pretty hard to call that one. I mean, it's going to be really interesting because these are 2 sides packed with talent. I mean, obviously the rumours of Tevez to Barcelona failed to materialise. That would have been a great story, but they've got Byron Castillo, who's an excellent fullback there as well. Diaz pulling the strings, Mastriani and Garces up front. Experienced guys who can provide goals. And personally, I'm looking forward to the excellently named Adonis Stalin Preciado as well in the midfield there. But I think Torque are going to give them a real run for their money because they've got an interestingly assembled squad there. Obviously, they've benefited from that link to the City group there, but they've got Sebastian Guerrero up front. He popped up with a 98th minute equaliser in their first game of the season there in a 1-1 draw against Cerro Largo. As well as him, who's definitely a player to watch out for, you've got Allende, the promising Chilean midfielder. You've got Thiago Palacios, who we saw a lot of in Argentina at Platense and came through the River Plate Academy. Nicolas Syria, really exciting youngster as well. Even someone like Gaston Gurciaga in goal was someone who I always loved for the under-20 Uruguay side and thought he was going to have a bigger career. So there's a lot of interesting young names to watch there. And I think Barcelona will be really sort of worried about this fixture. I think they'll probably still prevail, get the game back with intact or not by losing too much, and then they'll probably be able to see them off in Guayaquil. But that's going to be a real tough test early on, and potentially we could see a bit of an upset in the first round.
Yeah, it's a surprisingly strong tie for the first round of the Libertadores, as you say. Montevideo City Torque, one of the City group clubs, and have been steadily improving. They were in this Copa Sudamericana last year, failed to get out of their group stage, but of course only the winners progressed from that. Independiente from Argentina took the spot there, but they were very competitive, maybe a little bit unfortunate not to have progressed in that tournament. Their first year in the Copa Libertadores, but by no means there just to make up the numbers against a Barcelona side that reached the semi-finals last year. So it's a big tie for that first round. Simon, in the other 2 games we've got this week, we see Deportivo Lara hosting Bolívar and Universidad Cesar Vallejo hosting Olimpia. I mean, Olimpia, another huge club in South American football, to find themselves here in the first round of qualifying.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Olimpia will fancy their chances against Cesar Vallejo. Obviously, a Peruvian side. Peruvian teams haven't had the best record. Not of Colombians, I can't criticize in the Libertadores in recent years. Pinnacle have Cesar Vallejo at 3.90, Olimpia at 1.961. So Olimpia are quite strong favourites in that one, and I think that's fair enough. Olimpia are a strong side. I think it'll be really interesting as well to see Deportivo Lara against Bolívar. Lara, probably not Venezuela's strongest side. They've got a few interesting players. For me, Telasco Segovia, the 18-year-old defence midfielder, is a really high-quality player, incredibly mature and intelligent. He played last year's Libertadores qualifiers against Santos, and for me, he was kind of the standout performer in that game. So there's a few players. Also, I think Freddy Vargas is back from Dallas, back from his loan in Dallas. So he'll be wanting to make a point, prove a point, 22-year-old formerly U20 international, and obviously Bolivar are coming into this game off a 7-0 win against Blooming in the league, so they're in good form, and obviously they'll have the altitude. So I think for Deportivo Lara, they'll really need something in that first leg. Pinnacle have this as an interesting one: 2.440 for Lara, 2.890 for Bolivar, and 3.190 for the draw. So they think they're probably looking at Bolivar's recent performances and putting a lot on that. Obviously, we've seen Bolivian sides generally do much, much better at home than away. But if Lara want anything out of this game, they're really going to be motivated to get that win at home. And while I don't think they're quite on the level of Táchira or Caracas, who we'll see in the group stage, they've got a few decent players. Freddy Vargas will be one to watch, and Telasco Segovia, I think, is a top player who could, have a future career in Europe. So if you're tuning in, that's one to watch out for as well. But Tom, you tell me about Olympia. You probably see them more than I have. What do you think of them?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think out of all the three ties, they are the ones who look like they've got the most comfortable draw there. I mean, obviously, your anti-Peruvian bias from what you've seen in the national team is probably affecting your opinion of Cesar Vallejo. But, I think Olympia will be pretty comfortable here. They've got, as they always seem to do, quite an experienced group here. You've got Alcaraz, Wigan legend there at the back, and Salcedo, who I always thought was pretty good at Huracan when he was in Argentina. And then just looking through the midfield, you've got Recalde, Camacho, Ortiz, Silva, Candia, all really seasoned pros in the middle, and Quintana's a good prospect as well. And up front, you've got Derlis Gonzalez, lots of star quality there. So I think Olympia, while they might not necessarily do too much in the latter stages of this competition, they're gonna be pretty hopeful for a win here. I mean, you look at the Peruvians, and yes, they've got Asquez in midfield, who's a solid player with a lot of European experience. But you look up front, Santiago Silva, not the one we all know and love, the other one, Alejandro Ramirez and Abdiel Arroyo. Are they going to provide enough goals really to get past this tough to beat Olympia side? Whereas, as I mentioned, Derlis up front is going to be one of the better strikers in this tournament. And I mean, talking strikers as well, just quickly to go back to the Bolivar team, obviously after they thumped Blooming there, I'm really interested to see what Bruno Savio and Chico, two Brazilians that they've brought in, are going to do, because they were filling their boots there in that opening game of the season, and you always see some Brazilian journeymen doing well with the Bolivian side. So I'll be keeping an eye out for them, and they've got some good Bolivia internationals in their side as well there, and even probably one of Peter's favourites, Pato Rodriguez, as well, making a name for himself. So it's going to be interesting, and I think probably all the away sides in this first leg will be the ones who fancy their chances of getting by, but it's definitely not a foregone conclusion, and we've seen some side tumble at this stage in the past.
Yeah, we have it, and it's also worth noting just how difficult it is to go from this stage in the Copper Libertadores through to the group stages and beyond, because it's a lot of football. We're very early in the season. We maybe in some leagues had the opening weekend just this weekend gone. Some leagues haven't even started yet, and yet these teams are straight back in with very competitive football. This week we have the first legs of those ties. Next week we have the second legs, and then the straight week after that into the second round. And there's 3 rounds of these home and away games, so 6 games over the next 6 weeks just to get yourselves into the group stages. And before we leave that then, Simon, I mean, for example, when we talk about difficult runs, we're talking about Olympia being big favourites against Real Vallejo in their tie. If they were to win that, they then go and play Atlético Nacional, another former champion. Then they would have to play the third round game against either Millonarios or Fluminense. So it's a really, really tricky path just to get to the group stages this year for some of these teams in the Copa Libertadores. And as I say, with the calendar the way it is, it's a really difficult aspect that needs to be considered when you're talking about the Libertadores and all of the things that we talk about making it such a difficult competition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, all of those sides, Millonarios, Fluminense, Olimpia, Nacional, they're all going to be thinking they've got enough to challenge in the groups and potentially get out of the groups. But only one side is going to make it there. These are all big sides, and it's a big deal to qualify for the Libertadores. And then if you find yourself in this early group qualifying rounds, you look at it and you think, I'm going to have easier games in the group stage potentially than we're going to face in this qualifying rounds. I think Nacional have strengthened really well. They've signed Giovanni Moreno, Alex Mejia, Dolan Pavon. These are all my favourites, so I'm delighted. But I might not see them in a Libertadores group stage. They're going to have difficult games to come. So all of these 4 sides you've mentioned, and then obviously Cesar Viejo, don't want to write them off as well. But Millonarios, Fluminense, Nacional, Olimpia, these are all some of the biggest sides in their countries, and only one of them is going to be in the group stage. So it's going to be fascinating to see. And while the qualifying round maybe doesn't get quite the attention of the group stage, and obviously we're all looking forward to the full thing getting underway in a few weeks' time, the qualifying round definitely produces some really interesting games, and it's over 2 legs, and it's drama, and it's hugely, hugely important because for these players and for these teams, 6 Copper Libertadores group stage games is massive. From a UK perspective, it gets you the visa to go and play in the Premier League or in the Championship or in League One. If you get into the qualifying, if you get into the group stage, you're there. If you're in the qualifying round, you don't get a visa. You think of the price it makes in terms of players' values. There's players who, for example, the striker at Caracas, Aquinola, he's staying at Caracas because he'll play 6 Libertadores group stage games, and that's going to be a big opportunity for him and for his profile. So there's so much to play for. The clubs as well see the value and the importance of having these 6 games. So it's nervy. If you get to the group stage and lose 6 games, that's not great. But to fall up in the qualifying round is a huge, huge blow financially in terms of the whole plans for the season. There'll be teams in these qualifying rounds who are rolling the dice, who are bringing in big players, big signings to get to that group stage because of what it will mean for the club, for the finances, for the profile. And most of them are going to be disappointed. We're only going to have 3 of all of these sides we're speaking about, including the guys who aren't even in it yet. There's only going to be a handful of them who are going to make it through. So it's a lot of pressure, and it's going to be fascinating to see. So four teams of this lot will going to get into the group stage, and it's not going to be easy.
Yeah, a lot of pressure and a lot of football because that all starts this week. And it will just keep running through for the next 6 weeks, which will lead up to, of course, what we were starting the podcast talking about, the World Cup qualifiers. So all the way through March, we'll be having Copper Libertadores qualifying rounds starting this week, 2nd legs next week, and then the start of the 2nd round the week after that, and so on. Loads of football to come in South America. We'll be back again in March to look back on probably, or I'm assuming it will be afterwards, but look back on a thrilling end to World Cup qualification. We'll, of course, know by then as well the group stages of the Copper Libertadores. And once you get the group stages of the Copper Libertadores, you really do get a sense of South American football for the year being set up on its course, and you can just watch it all unfold. That's what we've got to look forward to. Thanks, as ever, Tom, for giving us your insight there on the qualifiers and on the Libertadores.
Cheers. No, it's always good to be part of this discussion, and looking for a exciting end to the World Cup qualifiers and an exciting start to the Libertadores. So here's to a mad competition that always gives us plenty of storylines.
Yes, it does, and thanks to you as well, Simon.
No, you're welcome. Hopefully, Colombia make it to the World Cup. Otherwise, I'm resigning. But no. Enjoyed speaking to you about it. I feel better having got that off my chest. That some Colombian frustrations. Now I can dream of Colombian Libertadores triumph for at least a couple of months, and then reality will hit. But I still believe in Colombian football. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, enjoyed it.
Well, we will see how it goes, and we'll be back to pick over the bones of it in March. Until then, of course, go make sure you keep an eye on the Copper Libertadores, and you can find all the latest odds and betting insight on Pinnacle.com, plus plenty of other content on the Twitter at Pinnacle and the Instagram Pinnacle.betting, with plenty of other sports as well. Please gamble responsibly. Odds are correct at the time of recording. We'll be back again next month. Thanks very much for listening.